Hello everyone, this is part 10 of What If Naruto Was Neglected and Was Trained by Shisui, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist. To see more, comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Hello Minato-kun. Minato jumped slightly in surprise as his office doors swung open randomly. His surprise quickly turned into happiness as he saw his beautiful wife skip her way into his office. His shoulders perked up as she came strolling over to him, still dressed in her casual long green dress that ended right above her ankles. Her beautiful red hair was perfectly smooth and combed to perfection as it bounced behind her regally. Minato smiled warmly to his wife, kissing her softly as she hovered over him in his chair. Kushina, I didn't know you were stopping by today. Minato said, secretly glad she was here. It was the perfect distraction that he was looking for. The past few weeks had been some of the most stressful times for him since he had become Hokage. Every day had either been spent grueling over the Akatsuki ever since Jiraiya had told him they had been starting to mobilize through the elemental nations. Word had just come out that Kiri had just lost the Jinchuriki, Utakata, the container of the Rokubi, to the Akatsuki. It was a hard pill to swallow for Minato. His urge to train his kids burned more than ever as another Jinchuriki had been lost to the world. Their intention was still a mystery. Jiraiya was still working endless days and nights shuffling between his spy network and his son's sage training. And to add more fuel to his already burning and growing fire of nerves, his daughter and Team 11 had yet to return from their respective missions. It had been almost 10 days since the full moon and he had no word at all from either of the two teams he had sent out. Minato fought back a sigh at his thoughts. He knew he was just being overly paranoid. Team 11 was strong, no doubt the strongest genin Team Konoha had produced in the last few years, and Anko herself wasn't someone to take lightly. And the ragtag team of Kurenai, Narumi and Naruto were even better. Minato winced at the thought of his son. He and Kushina had definitely failed the boy. They were too caught up in training Narumi and Natsu because they were Jinchuriki. He was thinking of the big picture, failing every step of the way as a father in doing so. Minato-kun, are you listening to me? Minato blinked his eyes as he looked up to stare at his wife. Kushina was waving hand in front of his face, but he was too deep in thought to notice. Noticing the pout on Kushina's lips, he smiled sheepishly, raising his hands up in surrender. Sorry Kushina, I've just been stressed is all. Kushina's eyes glossed over with worry as she took a seat on the edge of his Hokage's desk, making sure not to sit on anything important. Once she was seated, she moved her hands over his, rubbing her thumb affectionately over his knuckles. They both felt the familiar spark ignite within them both at the touch, like they had all those years ago as genin. Minato felt some of his stress leave his body by the touch alone, allowing his wife's presence to physically calm him down. What's been stressful, honey? Minato frowned as he looked away from Kushina. The feeling of guilt exploding through him again, and it made it almost impossible to look his wife in the eyes. Reaching out, he glided his index finger over Kushina's own knuckles, tracing her veins as she stayed silent, waiting for him to speak. He couldn't put off this conversation anymore. It had been slowly eating up at him for the longest time and refused to stop chewing. I'm worried about Naruto. The words felt heavy as they left his lips, carrying much more weight than anything he had ever experienced before. Kushina looked at him in silent surprise at the mention of her third child's name. Minato finally had the courage to look back at Kushina, awaiting her response as he slid his hand within hers and gripped tightly. Finally revealing what truly had been bothering him all this time. Kushina felt a strange pinch of sadness swell up inside of her when she thought of Naruto. What do you mean, honey? Well, I mean, we haven't been good parents at all, right? Minato said, quickly getting to his feet, surprising Kushina. The beautiful redhead snapped her hand back impulsively as she watched her husband walk to the other side of the desk. Minato ran a hand through his unruly blonde spiky hair as he paced back and forth, a faraway look in his eye as his loud footsteps echoed in the closed-off room. We haven't trained him at all. We haven't even seen him come home in weeks. Hell, even months. Minato rambled off, his face twisting in disgust at himself the longer he talked. Kushina felt her heart threaten to stop beating when Minato's words reached her ears. She forcefully tore her eyes from her frantically pacing husband. She curled up her hand around her chest and rested it above her heart and frowned. She tried to avoid the subject for the longest time. It wasn't until a scarily accurate conversation she had had with Natsu a few days ago that really had got her mind spinning with realization. Come on, Car-san, since when had Naruto ever actually done anything? But we had to focus on. Does that even matter when we blatantly ignore our own sin? Yes, I know we focused heavily on Narumi and Natsu, but we just should have known better. Kushina flinched at her husband's harsh tone and looked down sadly. She clenched her fists tightly around her green dress. Kushina felt Minato's haze get turned to her, but she didn't look up at him. She couldn't bring herself to do so. I know. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it for days, Kushina pathetically admitted. She was trying to push down her shame as a mother for the past few months. She vaguely remembered when Narumi came back from her mission from Tuna Village. Her only daughter couldn't stop talking about Naruto, on how strong he had become without any of them training him. Needless to say, it was the rudest awakening Kushina had ever experienced. Minato fought back his tears, blinking them back as he walked over to his wife. Wrapping his long arms around Kushina, resting his head onto hers as she melted into his embrace. When did we become such horrible parents? Kushina couldn't help but laugh bitterly at herself and the whole situation. Shutting her eyes as she bathed in a cesspool of her and Minato's failure. They never talked about this before, and it was only a matter of time before one of them cracked under the guilt. And as horrible as it sounded, she was glad it was Minato. She hated the fact that she had failed as a mother. She tried to ignore it, but she couldn't for the life of her. It was hard enough to get out of the bed in the morning or even look at her two other kids the same. She reached her hard up and gently cupped Minato's cheek. The Yondaime leaned into her touch. I guess we always were, but we need to make it right. I agree. Narumi and Naruto should be returning soon from their mission. I want to start heavily training Naruto with everyone else. I want to do anything I can to prove to Naruto that we love him. And at the moment some outer deity had headed his call. His secretary had walked in, not even fazed by the slightest at seeing Kushina and Minato in such an intimate embrace. She merely smiled as the two of them pushed away from each other, both wearing a matching blush as Minato smiled sheepishly towards her. Sorry to bother you, Hokage-sama, Kushina-sama. But Team 11 and Team Kurenai have just returned from their missions. Minato felt his heart rate speed up as he looked at Kushina expectantly. Both shared a silent conversation as he looked back at his secretary. Slightly apprehensively he nodded his head. Yes, please send them in. The girl nodded her head and quickly excused herself from the room. The door closed with a soft click and Minato tried his best to mask his nerves as he took a seat back down onto his chair. Kushina did the same, wiping her arm over her eyes to rid any evidence of her sadness as she stood beside her husband. Time seemed to click by incredibly slowly as both adults waited for the door to open in front of them. Minato felt his hands start to clam up with nervousness as he drummed his fingers in a rhythmic pattern on his desk. Neither of them knew what they were going to say to their son, and Minato was excited to hear that both teams managed to come back safely. The two missions had taken him much longer than he had anticipated, and he was certain that Team 11 managed to make their way over to Yukigakure to assist Kurenai and her team. It was the only explanation since he had received a letter from a pretty famous bridge builder about upping their trading system with Konoha due to Team 11's success. He was a happy Hokage when he read that letter. Miento and Kushina both felt their breath hitch as the familiar clicking of the door echoed in the room. Minato had already prepared the biggest nerve-free smile he could muster up, but it quickly faded as he saw only Kurenai and Narumi waltz into the room. Kurenai and Narumi both bowed to their leader as the door closed shut behind them. Greetings, Hokage-sama. Team 11 wanted me to tell you that they will be giving their mission details first thing tomorrow morning. They were pretty wiped out from the trip, Kurenai said, her voice lacking the previous vigor it once held as she spoke. Narumi nodded besides her as she looked at her parents. Miento just nodded. He could accept that. It wasn't rare for shinobi to postpone their mission details until the next day to make sure everything was as accurate as possible. And he was already aware that their mission was a success, so he would let it slide easily. He did raise an eyebrow slightly, his gaze shifting between the two women standing in front of him. He couldn't explain it, but both women were definitely acting strange, much more different than they were back when he had assigned the mission. I see, then does that mean Naruto is with them as well? I was hoping to speak to him. Both Minato and Kushina noticed that both the women flinched at his words, each looking away from his cage gaze. Minato felt his heart drop slightly as he watched their eyes gloss over sadly. A tense silence pulled in the room as Kurenai stepped back and allowed Narumi to step forward. They had discussed this privately between the two of them on who would be the one to tell the Hokage. Narumi insisted that it be her, and Kurenai wasn't going to fight her on her decision, as the red-eyed beauty was still pretty shaken up by the whole ordeal herself. Narumi took a deep sigh as she stopped in front of her father's desk, her eyes finally looking up to see deep into her parents' attentive gazes. Actually, this involves Naruto ni. Narumi hesitantly said, fidgeting her now fully healed arm back and forth. Minato and Kushina had stayed silent as Narumi went on and informed them both of what exactly happened on their mission. She didn't leave out a single detail, telling everything that happened that led up to them finding their secret base and saving all of the kids, to Kurenai finding Kagami, who was waiting patiently downstairs with a group of shinobi council members. She even told them about her completely antagonizing her brother and their fight in the hotel hallway, which made everyone in the room grimace at her explanation. Minato and Kushina didn't even blink at the daughter's words, both paying such great attention to her to not miss out on a singular detail. Minato waited until Narumi finished speaking to voice his own confusion. Running a hand through his hair, he raised his eyebrow. I see. It seems your mission was a complete success then. I do not see how this involves Naruto's absence. Narumi fought back a flinch as she tilted her head to once again stare into the currently emotional eyes of Kurenai. Kurenai hesitantly nodded her head, fidgeting slightly in pace as her mind quickly flashed the dream she was having when she was under Naruto's genjutsu. At the thought, she wanted to wrap her hand around her heart in pain. Every time her mind wandered to Naruto and the dream, her heart ached like it never had before. It was almost like she had to experience the very pain Naruto had to go to when he was all alone and fighting with his inner thoughts. She felt his pain, his heartbreak, his struggle. Narumi, noticing the hurtful look passing through the red eyes, beauty quickly turned back to her father. That was when I had found Naruto ni. He was trying to abandon the mission and the village. The second her words left her mouth, pure silence engulfed the room. Narumi felt Kurenai recoil once again, but she ignored it, keeping her blank expression trained on her parents. Both Minato and Kushina both felt their mouths fall open in shock and their eyes grow wide in disbelief. Kushina actually gasped, covering her mouth with one hand as her other tightened around Minato's shoulder painfully. Minato ignored the pain from his wife's nails digging into his shoulder as he felt the biggest wave of dread come crashing down onto him. His heart had stopped beating for a moment, and for a second he had thought he had just kicked the bucket eternally. Finally finding it in himself to breathe, he traced over his daughter's face for any sign of lying. Once he found none, he bit his lip. Blood leaked into his mouth from the pain as he tightened his hands around his desk. Minato looked down, not wanting to ask the question he knew the answer to. And what happened after that? Narumi closed her tired eyes, giving him a moment to rest as she spoke. Schooling her emotions, she spoke truthfully. He succeeded. Hearing a gasp, all eyes turned to see Kushina, hand gripped tightly around her mouth, trying her best to hold back her now excessive crying. Minato acted quickly. He scooped his crying wife into his arms and held her tightly to his chest. Both Kurenai and Narumi ignored the motion as Minato blinked back a few tears himself, trying his best to keep down the overwhelming amount of guilt he was bathing in. The rational side of his conscience was laughing at him. Pure unadulterated irony echoed in his head in the most mocking tone he had ever felt. You honestly can't say you're surprised, can you? How? I found him getting ready to leave and he told me what he was doing. I of course tried to persuade him into staying and it ended up in us fighting just outside the base rather ruthlessly. He broke my arm in the process, Narumi said, holding up her previously broken arm, making Minato widen his eyes again. Narumi continued, he got the better of me and he beat me. When I woke up he was already gone. Narumi looked expectantly back at Kurenai again. Narumi pursed her lips as she let her worlds sink themselves into her parents. Kurenai noticed the younger girl's stare and felt her heart start to stutter. The Junie stepped up, taking her place confidently next to Narumi as her now stoic face looked at Minato. Sadly, yes, it's true, Hokage-sama, I had been fighting Kagami-san in the base the whole time, while simultaneously saving the captured girls. When I had walked out, I found Narumi already knocked unconscious, with Naruto-kun nowhere in sight. Kurenai said. Kushina pulled away from her husband's arms faster, her deep purple eyes still moist with tears as she glowered at the town shinobi. And why didn't you go after him? Why did you let my baby boy abandon this village? We sustained massive amounts of injuries, Kushina-sama. Narumi had no idea where Naruto-kun was headed since she couldn't sense his chakra signature after I got her to wake up. And when the remainder of Team 11 showed up, we were all suffering from chakra exhaustion. If we followed right away, we would have most likely been ambushed and killed before we got very far. Minato soothed his sobbing wife as she clung into his for dear life. Minato tried his best to not let his emotions show on his face, but he wasn't faring very well. He was always an honest man who wore his heart on his sleeve. How did he manage to get past you, Narumi? There was no way he should have been stronger than you, he asked, flinching against his words felt like a dagger that plunged in his heart. It was the bitter truth, and it hurt like hell for Minato to even say. Narumi fought back the urge to scowl at her father, quickly schooling her emotions as she looked deep with her father's matching sapphire eyes. She didn't even look back at Kurenai as she spoke, her mind was already made up before they had left Roka. He was just stronger than me, nothing special about him. He was just better, she lied. Minato felt his heart break again, finally letting loose a singular tear as he placed Kushina down into his office chair. Minato ran his hand through his hair as he turned his back to the room and looked out the giant bay window in the room. He didn't want his family and Kurenai to see his apparent distress at the situation. Kurenai also did well to mask her surprise at Narumi's words. The young Namikaze didn't flinch as she felt Kurenai's gaze bore a hole into the side of her head. Minato-kun, we need to send out a search party for Naruto. Kushina said frantically, her heart pounding inside her ribcage. He can't be very far, and if we send out best senses along with Narumi then. About that, all eyes now turned back to Narumi as she rudely cut off her mother. A rainbow of eyes stared into her all with varying emotions as the room grew quiet. Kurenai felt alarm bells start to ring in her head. This wasn't part of the plan that they had discussed before coming to meet the Hokage. She watched on edge as Narumi gave her a sad smile, her eyes shining apologetically as she did so. I will not partake in any mission regarding Naruto ni, no matter what it may be. What? Narumi didn't flinch as her parents screamed loudly. Well, it was mainly her mother as she bursted out of Minato's chair and stared at Narumi with a mixture of shock and anger. Minato wasn't faring much better as he let his hand fall limp to his side as Kurenai felt her head grow dizzy at her words. Minato rapidly shook her head trying to comprehend what his daughter had just said. Narumi's words played themselves over again in his mind as he felt her legs start to shake. Narumi, how could you say that? He's your brother, Naruto ni. Naruto had made it very clear to me when we had fought that he sees none of us as family. And I can't help but feel that it was our fault that we drove him away from us, from the village. And that last thing I want is to force him back into a family that was never actually a family for him. The room ended up falling so silent, Narumi and Kurenai could physically hear the two Namikaze's hearts shatter completely. Kushina only bawled louder as Minato turned away from Narumi and Kurenai, furiously wiping his arm over his eyes to stop the wetness. Minato scowled in disgust at himself. He was truly and utterly a disgrace and was never worthy of being called a father. He leaned on the large bay window, slamming him fist slightly as he tried to calm his emotions. Kurenai had looked over at Narumi, her opinion on the young girl had just raised significantly. She would have never expected Narumi to completely turn around on her attitude towards Naruto. But then again, she wasn't sure what they had talked about when they had fought back in Roka. You know, by refusing your mission you were disobeying the orders from the Hokage himself, and you had also shown heavy disobedience to Kurenai during your mission in Yukigaku. Both are sentenced to a decrease to your shinobi rank. Minato said, his wife turning to look at him in shock. Narumi then did something no one was expecting. She tore off her Chunin uniform, the fabric shifting together echoed in the room as she threw it on the ground. Everyone stared at Narumi in complete and utter shock as she untied her headband, grabbing it by the cloth and letting it dangle in front of her. Then do so, Hokage-sama. Minato bit his lip harder. Kushina had tried to talk reason into the daughter, but she just wouldn't hear it. Narumi just kept her gaze on Minato as the Hokage felt the reality check hit him again. He finally turned back to his daughter. He met her challenging glare with one of indifference. Silently shifting his gaze to Kurenai, her comparably less intense gaze was confusing to the blonde man. Minato took a few deep breaths. He grabbed his wife and brought her to her feet. Kushina tried to fight back and was about to scream at him until she saw the voidless eyes stare blankly ahead. Kushina quickly closed her mouth as Minato bent down and grabbed the Chunin vest on the floor. He couldn't play favorites or show blatant favoritism. How ironic. Narumi Namikaze, you are here stripped of your Chunin rank and sent back to a life of a genin until you prove your loyalty to the village. Minato said, ignoring his wife's outburst and Kurenai's shocked expression. Narumi merely nodded, tying her headband back around her forehead. Minato then quickly grabbed a scroll on his desk and had begun writing a pretty lengthy scroll. Once he was finished, he signaled for an Anbu guard to come down and handed the masked shinobi the scroll. His heart ached as he did so, but this is what he deserved. He had no excuse for his horrible parenting, and he would have to accept the consequences for them. No matter what they may be, it broke his heart. And his wife wasn't failing any better. It was karma coming back at them with everything it had, and they deserved every single ounce of it. As of now, Naruto Namikaze is labeled as a high B-class missing nin. He is to be brought back alive to Konoha no Sato for a price of 10 million, Ryo. Okay Keys, you know what to do, right? Yes. If you start to lose control, then I stab you multiple times. Are you sure that's what I have to do? Naruto chuckled as he sat cross-legged in a fairly enclosed forest clearing in Sound Country. He paid no attention to the floating kunai above his legs and arms as he reached up and rubbed the girl's head affectionately. Naruto gave a soft smile and it helped ease the young girl's tension considerably. Yes, the giant turtle said he will try and pull back as much as he can, but in case we aren't fast enough, that I need you to snap me out of it. I would appreciate it if you didn't refer to me as a giant turtle. But am I wrong? Naruto laughed as he ignored the Bayu as he started to mumble to himself and curse at the young boy. It had been yet another month since Naruto and Keys had started the journey, and while their progress to Kumo had been slow, Naruto had made it a point to get as much training in for both Keys and himself. Keys was progressing much faster than Naruto had anticipated, at a much faster rate than Naruto had when he was training with Shisui. The girl's magnet release was a scary bloodline. She was nowhere close to mastering it by any means. But she was proficient enough now that she barely even had to put any effort into control smaller objects like kunai and senbon. The puppets were a little more tricky for her. The masked man was kind enough to leave them 2 puppets in his scroll that he packed for the kids. It was the same 2 puppets that Keys had attacked Naruto with, and she was having a hard time controlling them. Since she didn't know how to actually use and control chakra strings, she was completely reliant on her magnet release. Before, her emotions were strong enough to take control and almost act like the puppets had their own free will. It responded to her fear, almost like a defense mechanism. Naruto had chalked it up to her very mediocre chakra control, and she spent most of her days balancing kunai above 3 of her fingers while training in the tree climbing exercise. And while she was busy with her chakra control, Naruto most of his time went into fine-tuning his genjutsu and ninjutsu. He had added over 10 jutsu to his water and blood style arsenal, and his genjutsu was almost second-hand nature to him. Naruto wanted to increase his speed, but sadly he didn't have any higher training weights on him, and more of the ones that were sold in stores were way past his price range to afford. He did think about stealing some, but a harsh glare from Keys had stopped his thoughts before they went very far. So he had given the smaller weights he was wearing to the young girl. She protested at first, but after Naruto's explanation she ended up caving in, rather begrudgingly, but it was still a win in Naruto's book. But for the past 3 weeks Isabu had told Naruto that it was time to start training in the Bijuas chakra. Naruto was hesitant at first. He didn't want to end up losing control and putting Keys in any danger. Isabu was quick to squash Naruto's fears, as he had explained that if they had an outsider perform physical harm on him, then it would give Isabu enough time to suck back in the chakra he was forcing into Naruto's coils. After he had explained this to Keys, she looked at him like he was crazy, which he understood why, since it was far-fetched and quite peculiar, especially to someone so young. Keys ended up agreeing pretty quickly, and most nights were spent dedicated to his Beiyu training. Isabu had been a good coach and never let it get too bad that Naruto ended up losing control. The vile chakra was potent, and it burned like hell in his veins, and he wasn't sure if he would ever get used to it. Over time, Isabu said that it would burn less and less the more he used it in his body. Every Jinchuriki had to go through this with the exception of the Kyuubi. The Kyuubi was special, and he was the only one whose chakra would actually heal their host, so they never actually felt the burn in their bodies. Naruto and Isabu haven't had a lot of success. They were about halfway to forming a singular tail before Naruto could feel his control slipping away. And it had been like that for the first 3 weeks into training. Baby steps were being made, but ultimately it ended in failure. Naruto had begun to get irritated in his lack of results. He didn't think it would have been this hard to control even a singular tail. But it was mainly the toll it was taking on his body. The seal on his stomach wasn't like any of the other Jinchuriki. His seal was much more freeing to Isabu and allowed the demon more control over his chakra, as he was willingly allowing Naruto to use it, and Naruto could physically feel when Isabu was molding it. And since his seal had much more leeway in that regard, Naruto, it would always burn almost unbearably every single time. Okay, let's do this, Naruto said to both Keys and Isabu, but mainly he was talking to himself. He could already feel the phantom pain relieving itself in his body as he formed a ram seal in front of him. He let the warm breeze glide over him as he shut his eyes and took multiple deep breaths. Keys watched him with a mixture of worry and concentration as a fiery red chakra started to form around his body. The floor under Naruto started to break away, sinking a few inches deep as the pressure started to cut the grass around him. Naruto fought back a wince as the malevolent chakra forced its way into his coiled. His veins felt like they were on fire as he stayed rooted in place, fighting back against the exertion. The chakra cloak then began to take shape. The color had started to darken to a very deep shade of maroon as half a tail had started to grow behind him. The tail was still incomplete as it was about half the size that it should be. Naruto fought back, gasping in pain as Isabu pumped more chakra into him. Keys took a step back from the amount of pressure that was emitting from Naruto, shuddering as the vile chakra filled the area with a thick cloud of malice. She kept her control on the kunais as Naruto raised his head. His eyes opened wide in pain, and Keys could see the pain resonating in his now multicolored eyes. Naruto's golden right eye went the widest it had ever been. His body felt like he was running through the depths of hell, and he could physically feel his blood start to burn. A deep growl escaped its way from Naruto's throat as his Sharingan eye spun wildly in his socket, having activated from the over amount of chakra in his body. Keys grew more concerned as her kunai started to shake from the demon's chakra and was about to send them into Naruto's body. She was stopped as Naruto reached out to her, telling her to stop as the tail behind him started to grow in size. No, don't. I'm almost there. Keys wanted to argue, but she reluctantly stayed silent as Naruto fell down to the ground. He was holding himself with one arm as he gasped for air, the chakra suffocating. His air supply was slowly diminishing, but Isabu still hadn't pulled back and he was barely still in control of his actions. It took everything in his body to stop Keys from ending the training prematurely. Blades of grass started to disintegrate under the chakra as he screamed. He was ignoring Isabu's words as the scream tore from his throat and echoed into the quiet night. Hold on for just a second, Naruto. Naruto didn't hear the demon. It felt like the skin was getting burnt to a crisp as two identical horns made of chakra outlined the outer edges of his head. He felt his teeth grow sharper, and with a loud swing the singular chakra tail came to life as he smashed against the tree behind him. Keys jumped slightly from the impact and was about to plunge the kunai into Naruto to stop him until he fell to the ground panting. She couldn't get a good look at his face, but the chakra cloak was still flowing over his body. The immense pressure suddenly vanished and the sense of malice was much smaller than it was before. The tail of chakra swung behind Naruto before falling to the ground and resting beside the hurting blonde. Keys called his name as she ran over to him, reaching out to see if he was okay. As soon as her hand made contact with Naruto, she instinctively snapped her hand back with a squeal. The chakra cloak was incredibly hot and burned her at the touch instantly. She winced in pain as she gripped her hand painfully. Naruto-san, are you okay? Why yeah. I'm still in co-control, right? Naruto asked between breaths, turning his face to stare into the heavily concerned eyes of Keys. Keys nodded happily, glad to see that he was okay as his Sharingan stopped spinning. Naruto slowly got to his feet with the help of Keys. The chakra cloak didn't burn anymore as it receded into a very thin layer over his skin and bubbled comfortably. Naruto's legs were shaky as he stood tall, trying his best to not lean into the young girl as his chakra tail stuck itself into the ground to keep him centered. Naruto's head felt wobbly, rocking back and forth as he finally got his breathing back under control. Good job, kid, you managed to stay in control and master the first tail. Isabu stated proudly. He actually didn't think Naruto would be able to master the first tail in such a short amount of time. It was heavily taxing on the boy's body and we would take more time until he could go into the chakra state himself, but the pain would be severely reduced and almost non-existent next time he attempted to enter the first tail. The Bayu grinned as Naruto just hummed in response. It was a miracle in itself that he was still conscious after all of that. Naruto allowed his eyes to shut as Isabu's chakra reverted back into him. The red chakra swirled around the two kids until flowing into the invisible seal on his chest. Naruto separated himself from Keys as he pushed his back up against a tree. The pain in his body had vanished, but the lingering soreness had stayed back with a vengeance. Keys sighed in relief as she saw Naruto just look to be worn out and not physically hurt. She couldn't even imagine what pain he was going through while dealing with demonic chakra. She was skeptical at first when Naruto had told her about the demon in his gut, and she would be lying if she said she wasn't a little scared after he had said that. Then Naruto went on to share about his past to the young girl, and Keys had instantly forgot about her fear or worries as they talked the night away. He had told her in confidence and they both felt a special connection to each other, and for once in her entire life, she truly felt special. Naruto-san, can I ask you something? Naruto turned down to look at Keys. He smiled playfully as he reached a heavy arm forward and ruffled her hair with much more vigor than he had before. Keys shrieked in surprise as her head copied Naruto's from earlier and wobbled back and forth as he completely messed up her hair. Keys giggled at the attention as she reached up to try and stop the ruthless attack on her head, grabbing his hand as she smiled up at Naruto. The blonde laughed quietly before nodding his head at Keys after she let go of his hand. Well, Naruto watched her as she shifted in place awkwardly, her face flushed a deep crimson red as she fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. Naruto's eyes grew more worried as he attempted to get a little closer to the girl. She had acted like this since they had the very emotional talk in the hotel a month ago, and he was beginning to get really worried. Keys tried to hide her growing embarrassment with her free hand as she looked away from him. She really wanted to ask about a certain point in Naruto's past, but she wasn't sure if she would get offended or sad if she did. Naruto had told her she could ask him anything she wanted, but she learned to be withdrawn in the past years when she was alone, so it was hard for her to ask. After a few minutes of awkward silence and some more awkward kicking on the ground, Keys finally turned to Naruto, her face still incredibly red as her golden eyes shined with curiosity. See, can you tell me about this Shisui person? Why you talk about him highly, and I guess. I was just curious. Naruto smiled so wide his teeth were showing. Keys felt her awkwardness slowly fade away as he took a seat next to her, hand on her head as she beamed up at him. Naruto felt an overwhelming amount of pride surge in him. He gets down a new technique with his Biju partner and gets to talk about Shisui. Yes, I'll be happy to, Keys-chan. Konoha. Ha. Is this seriously real? It certainly looks like it is, Tits-chan. Narumi sweet dropped as she looked at the flabbergasted looks from Team 11 as they stared at her in disbelief. Beneath her sweet drop, though, she was feeling extremely uncomfortable in her current situation. She would much rather be talking to her family about her traitorous brother than in this situation, and she would choose that 100 times over. The sexy Junin blinked several times as she tried to comprehend the situation. Shizuka and Sai were looking at her with a mixture of unease and pure shock. And it was starting to really get under her skin. This is where you crack. How pathetic. I swear I'm going to find a muzzle to put on you to finally shut you up for once. The four of them stood silently in the middle of the training ground as they started at each other. Narumi had interrupted the current training session rather unexpectedly, making the remaining Team 11 members slightly go on edge. Narumi couldn't blame them though. She was rather unpleasant the last time they had worked together in tuna and was very distant when they traveled back together from Roka. Narumi hadn't seen any of them since their return to Konoha, since she was quite busy returning all of her chunin vests and was forced to take several loyalty and performance tests since she had been demoted. It was standardized, but it didn't make it any less pointless, or boring. So once she had finally gotten free time, she made a conscious effort to seek out the team after her talk with her father just moments ago. Narumi watched uncomfortably as Shizuka and Sai started to bicker about the black-haired girl's nickname. She vaguely remembered something similar happening back in Tizuna, but it was still surprising to watch. Anko's eyes hadn't left the young Namika's as her brown eyes tried their best to read the redhead. Something was definitely different about Narumi and she didn't know what it could be. For one, she wasn't wearing her chunin vest, the dark green jacket was nowhere to be seen, and she was dressed far more casually than Anko had ever seen her. She wore the same black shinobi pants that were the perfect combination of not too tight, but loose enough to move freely. She was wearing a dark t-shirt that ended just above her belly button that then turned into fishnets that covered up her midriff and both of her arms and ended just below her elbows. The remaining space of her right arm was completely covered in bandage wrapping, and her Konoha headband was still wrapped proudly around her forehead with a dark blue cloth to match her shinobi sandals. Narumi bowed her head, catching the genin off guard, especially Shizuka, who voiced her confusion rather loudly. Anko stayed silent as she watched Narumi under a critical eye. Something was fishy about this whole ordeal. Narumi, Namika's here reporting for duty. As of today I will be your new genin teammate. Ha. All three of the Team 11 members said simultaneously, not taking their eyes away from the bowing Namika's. Narumi stayed in her bowing position and didn't want to look up. She could feel her cheeks reddening in embarrassment and didn't want him to notice. Anko felt her mind shut down on her completely as she digested what Narumi had said. Genin. But you are a chunin. Due to my disobedience to Kurenai-san on our last mission and my refusal to several missions regarding Naruto, Hokage-sama deemed it necessary to demote my shinobi rank until I prove that I can be a chunin of Konoha no Sato. Once again, Team 11 was rendered speechless. Shizuka was the first to break out of her stature. She felt her lips form a scowl as she glared at Narumi. She stalked over to Narumi and grabbed the girl by the collar of her shirt and brought her close. Narumi didn't even flinch and was very thankful the red in her cheeks had faded. What do you mean refusal of missions regarding Naruto-kun? Are you not even trying to get him back? Shizuka growled out, her grip tightening around Narumi's shirt. The redhead shook her head negatively to Shizuka. That seemed to be the wrong choice and it only caused Shiozuka to grow angrier. TCH, how typical of you. Just like you Namikaze to abandon him again when he needs us the most. How fucking dare. Shizuka, enough, Anko said, pulling away Shizuka from Narumi. The black-haired genin scowled at her sensei as Narumi smoothed out her now wrinkled shirt. Anko scolded Shizuka with a silent glare, making the smaller girl recoil slightly. Anko pursed her lips as she turned back to Narumi. Look, as much as we would like to trust you about Naruto-kun, we don't. He had told us how you all treated him and left him alone for all these years, and frankly, we are all pretty disgusted by it. Anko said rudely, her eyes sharpening as Shizuka and Sai nodded along with their sensei. Narumi didn't even try to hide her agreement with them and she nodded her head. I understand. But, Anko started, drawing a frown from Shizuka. I will at least give you the benefit of the doubt and let you explain to us your side. Anko finished. Shizuka jumped up in surprise at Anko's words and looked at her sensei in shock. But sensei, I have no excuses whatsoever about my treatment, and I will not stand here and lie to you all and make up some lame excuse. Naruto had made it very clear to me on our last mission that he saw none of us Namikaze as family. He said we were all strangers to him, Naruto said, her eyes flashing with sadness for a moment. Team 11 looked at her in shock, at both her words and Naruto's actions. As for the reason for my refusal, I believe since we are the ones who drove him away, the last thing he wants is to return to the family that was never there for him. Narumi lied again. Shizuka grumbled in her spot, as Anko nodded her head. In a sad way, Anko could understand what the girl was saying. Naruto had left for a reason. He needed to get away from the place that reminded him of all his pain and suffering. No matter how much it hurt her to even say, she understood why. Sai seemed to share her thoughts as he looked away from Narumi, letting a frown take over. Yes, I can understand that. Sai muttered. Even so, why do you have to join our team? I much rather have Kagami-san instead. Kagami-san had been granted sole apprenticeship under Kurenai-san. She would be training him with her team and on days off. It was true, Kagami had proved his loyalty to Konoha and had come clean on everything he knew about the kidnappings and other information he might have known. Minato was quick to agree after learning about his rare chakra condition and believed him to be a good fit for the village. Kagami cried tears of joy as he was handed a Konoha headband after several weeks of waiting. Shizuka groaned as she turned back to Sai and Anko, throwing her arms to Narumi's direction as she yelled. And you guys are okay with this? This is a direct order from Hokage-sama. Fighting back is pointless. Shizuka glared at Sai and was about to retort until Anko had thrown her hand over the feisty girl's mouth. Shizuka grumbled in annoyance and Anko couldn't help but smirk somewhat playfully. Like what Sai-kun said, arguing is pointless. But, Anko said, turning to Narumi, she put on the darkest glare she could that actually sent a chill down the redhead's spine. Anko's eyes promised pain as she spoke. Her voice was void of any emotion as it echoed throughout the training ground. You will listen to my command no matter what. I won't tolerate disobedience of any kind. And if I sense even a single ounce of hostility from you, or even a single shed of disloyalty like you had done with Naruto-kun, I will not hesitate to turn you into the Hokage. Do you understand? Narumi gulped and nodded her head as she replied with a strong yes. After she had agreed, the dark look vanished from Anko's eyes and she put on a huge smile, clapping her hands in amusement and was muttering to herself about getting her banner to show Narumi. Shizuka pouted and glared at Narumi. I still would have preferred Kagami-san. Well, there's no need to complain, Tits-chan. Stressing about it will only give you more wrinkles. God damn it, Sai, shut up. Narumi once again sweet-dropped as Shizuka started throwing a large amount of kunai into his direction. Narumi wasn't sure, but she thought she saw a real look of fear flash in Sai's eyes as he started to run away from the girl's onslaught. Anko laughed loudly as she sprinted off towards her team, helping Shizuka in her attack and leaving Narumi in the field. Narumi expected something like this to happen, so she wasn't as hurt as she would have been. Still, Team 11 was definitely an odd group of shinobi. Narumi was starting to second-guess her choice of joining Team 11. Maybe I should have tried to join Kurenai-san's team instead. She thought with a groan as she looked up into the sky. She wasn't particularly close to Kurenai, well, Narumi really wasn't close with anyone outside of her family. But she and Kurenai had met up a few times during Narumi's month probation of tests, and Narumi was confident enough to call the two of them acquaintances now. Several of their talks had always revolved around Naruto. Since they were the only ones in Konoha who were aware of his secrets, and Narumi planned to keep it that way. It was part of the reason why she refused to tell anyone else the real reason Naruto had left. She was keeping a promise that she had made herself. When Kurenai had asked why, the answer came to Narumi faster than anything else. It was a way to make my parents see the error in their ways and finally see what they have been doing to Naruto. It's easy to convince them, especially under these circumstances. And I'm sure the last thing Naruto would want is more people to go after him or know that you were ever in danger. The only reason I told you about it was because he cares for you and I didn't want you to hate him. It was supposed to be a secret, so I will make sure it stays a secret. Narumi sighed again as she thought back to that day. Kurenai had been very shocked, but she understood well enough to drop the issue and they would only talk about it in secret, if they even talked about it at all. Her eyes watched a singular cloud float by and gave it a sad smile. She would prove to Naruto that she would be there for him. She wanted to make it up in any way she could. Even if they aren't family anymore, she would still try and support him for the time they had lost together. Stay safe out there, Naruto-ni. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.